Welcome back to All In Affordable Housing. I'm here, Matt Lownes, here with the wonderful 2nd District Legislator Fleming, Bridget Fleming. She's also running for New York's 1st Congressional District. Today we're here to talk about affordable housing, though. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you, Matt. First of all, thank you for focusing on this critically important issue. And thank you personally for having me here. It's really nice to see you and to be on LTV. We love LTV in my team, so thanks.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. This has been a great show to do. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm hoping I can spread awareness to all the different citizens in our towns. Um, I would love to start off by talking about the recently announced Community Housing Fund. Basically, for the viewers at home, Community Housing Fund was passed by the governor, and basically how it works is you could set up a 0.5% tax on purchases of real estate above $250,000, and that 0.5 tax of everything above that goes directly towards affordable housing. Each town themselves has to put it on a ballot measure, and at least in East Hampton, the plan is to have it on the 2022 ballot to be voted on by the public. In your opinion, how vital could this CHF be for the East End?
It's critical. It's a game changer. And by the way, it is going to be on, the state law requires that it be on the referendum in all 5 towns that are
Oh,
affected. So
okay.
it will be on in November
Awesome.
for Southampton, Shelter Island, Riverhead, and Southold, as well as East
Wow.
Hampton. It is a game changer. I mean, well, first of all, it's critically needed, and it was Assemblyman Fred Thiel who spearheaded the effort and introduced the legislation in the state legislature because he recognized how critically important this is. I've been in local office now for over 10 years. Fred has been one of our leaders for decades, and we have talked again and again and again about how critically important it is to tackle the affordable housing crisis, and it only gets worse. I mean, when I was on the Southampton Town Board, now over 6 years ago, I was part of an effort to build the first rental affordable housing in Southampton east of the Shinnecock Canal. And that's the Sandy Hollow project, which is up
Hmm.
on North Sea Road. Um, and it's 26 units. It took 5 years to achieve, several lawsuits, and a lot of late night meetings with a lot of very passionate pushback and passionate support as well. We've come a long way since that time. And so that same developer, Georgica Green Ventures, who kind of figured out how to use state tax credit funding to make some of these projects work in such an expensive place as where we live, has been able to achieve some other successes as well. The Pantico Road housing is one of those projects. There's one on 3 Mile Harbor that is nearing completion. So we've put little inroads, but the need is so vast that even it's almost you can't catch up. You need more. You're building, but what you're building is so limited relative to what the need is that the need continues to outpace what we've been able to achieve. So Fred's legislation, his idea. By the way, he was involved in the original Community Preservation Fund
Hmm.
establishment, which was back in 1995, and has allowed us to preserve open space in a way that has been transformational. This legislation is similarly transformational because he put it in to ensure that, as you pointed out, Matt, the funds that come in from a transfer tax on the purchase of real estate over $250,000 is used to offset what some of these red hot real estate prices are doing to us, which is limiting our community, losing
Hmm.
young people, losing the elderly, seniors who've been here forever, just can't afford it.
Hmm.
So what this fund is going to do is it's going to allow for a concerted effort to address that. And like everything in government, it will only work if the resources are there, and this establishes the resources that we're going to need.
Yeah, and you're the third East End politician I've talked to specifically about the CHF. When I talked to Thiel 2 weeks ago, I was quite stunned when he told me he wanted to get it on the 2023 ballot. And then I talked to Peter Van Scoyac of the show I host, Ask the Supervisor, and he's like, no, we're getting this thing going now.
Yeah.
And I would, I'm only 25 years old. I've only, I've seen some part of life, but not as much as you guys have. And I would consider this seriously to be the most important bill of my lifetime, out here at least, because when you look at the pandemic, if we were to have had the CHF fund, just in the first year of COVID alone out in East Hampton, there would have been $8 to $12 million that went towards affordable housing just from that 1 year alone, which I find really incredible. And it stinks that we didn't have it previous to the pandemic buying, but it is quite awesome to see the push for it from many different avenues, from many different parts of politics, and it seems as though everyone's pretty much in agreement about this. Do you, as far as that goes, have you heard any pushback on the CHF?
Nothing, which is so interesting because normally when you establish any kind of a revenue stream that comes from taxes, there is concern. I mean, we're seeing gas prices go up. We at the legislature just passed a bill that caps the taxes that can be imposed on gas starting June the 1st. And the reason we did that, the reason why cost-saving measures are being explored across government is because folks are facing crushing day-to-day costs in their living situations, and so at least elected officials on my side of the aisle who are hearing the folks who are really suffering are looking for opportunities to do that. So the cost of living includes the cost of housing, and the cost of housing is becoming insupportable. I mean, the median contract price of a home, what buyers actually pay, rose to $600,000 in May 2021 from $482,000 just the year before. I mean, we've seen on Long Island the median price of a home in 2021 has risen $89,000 in one calendar year. And that's all of Long Island, Matt. That's not just the East End. I mean, that's seen insane. What's happened in Newsday today. They discussed Southold and the North Fork. And that was one of the places where it used to be less expensive, but it's no longer the case. We are seeing costs absolutely skyrocket, and what that means is, can you get a down payment? If you have to cover housing costs with more than 30% of your income, it is very, very difficult to accumulate the kind of capital you need to put a down payment on a home. And what we're seeing here on Long Island is we're nowhere near 30% for most people. It's often 50%, 60%. Some people pay 70% of their income for rental housing. And that means you're just tossing that equity away. You have no ability to save what you need to save to buy a home. So this is just a very, very exciting undertaking, and I haven't heard a single objection to it. So I'm glad that Peter had the foresight to push to get it on the referendum for this cycle, because we need it sooner rather than later. And I think he probably is aware of what we're seeing, which is the effort to create a campaign that will ensure passage is not going to be as great as it would if we had to, persuade people that this was a great idea. Everyone agrees. This is not only a great idea, it's a critically necessary idea.
Yeah, this isn't a direct quote from Peter, but basically the gist of what we said was, look, there's only so much more property to buy. So we need to get this in sooner than later, and that's very logical. You can't sometimes you cannot argue with logic. But let's move on to the next topic. I'm going to skip one of the questions for now because I do want to get into this. That's very critical issue, not just in Long Island. I do want people to understand there's not just housing issues in Long Island. There's housing issues across our entire country. Red, blue, doesn't matter. But the one national, local, state topic that is equal across the board is when we talk about affordable housing, we hear two terms, YIMBY and NIMBY. Yes in my backyard and no in my backyard. You talk to everyday citizens all the time from both sides. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, what is the main difference between a YIMBY and a NIMBY citizen? Because sometimes you often find people being pushed, or everyday citizens being pushed narratives from one of two sides, and it's hard for people to understand where all this is coming from.
Well, I think it's a great question because the issue of developing new housing is a very local issue, and local public officials are the ones who have to absorb that pushback and focus on it in a way that includes the concerns of stakeholders who might not be on board immediately. I think, as we talked about just a moment ago, the cost of living has gone so high on Long Island in particular. I mean, on Long Island, the cost of living index is 47% higher than it is for the rest of the country. So when you talk about the rest of the country having this issue with regard to, how and where and when and, can we build affordable housing, those questions are amplified, by the fact that it's 47% more expensive to live on Long Island. So that being said, we at the local level, and I hope to be representing this community in Congress, but right now I'm in the county. I was in the town board before then. We saw, particularly at the town board level, folks who are in the immediate vicinity of any proposed housing development are usually the ones who have the greatest concerns. And that makes sense. They're worried about traffic. They're worried about potential noise. They're worried about the aesthetic of the housing. Unfortunately, on Long Island, we have folks who are worried about the racial component of people in their communities. We have to work very hard to fight against that. And that's one of the things that we saw with the housing I mentioned, the Sandy Hollow project. Yep. When it was first proposed, there was a lot of concern that it would bring folks to the community that weren't ordinarily members of the community. And I'll be honest with you, there was a racial component to that, which we had to address and we had to push back on because everyone is welcome in our communities. And what we see now is ordinary families who are born and raised here are unable to afford homes. And so you can change a person from a YIMBY, from a NIMBY to a YIMBY by having a clear conversation. And one of the things that we've seen is these projects that have been built recently have been so successful. The aesthetic is beautiful. It suits the local vernacular from an architectural standpoint. It hasn't attracted a terrible element of the community. Just the opposite. These are folks who are proud of their homes, who are so glad to have the opportunity to own or to rent a beautiful home in their community, that there's a heightened level of appreciation and folks take special care of those housing developments. So the more we see that pattern emerge, that these communities, these developments are attractive and that the folks there are proud members of our community, the easier it is to turn somebody from a NIMBY to YIMBY. But you don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's a local question. It's a local issue that needs to be addressed with respect by local public officials. So you got to listen to what the concerns are, and then you have to address them in a realistic way. And in that way, the not in my backyard community, becomes more and more welcoming. But I'll say in a way, it's unfortunate the cause for that shift, but the shift is happening that more and more people say, I get it. We need to do this. And if it means making a temporary sacrifice so that construction can happen, on my block, I'm for it because my kids need a place to live.
Exactly, and that's what I hear from countless members in the public, whether I interview them or they've seen my show and they're talking to me about it at the store. It's you hear a lot, especially from mothers. I'm moving if my grandkids can't live here. If I can't see my grandkids, I'm moving, and that's the bottom line. There is no wiggle room there. And I do find it very interesting as a young person. You see some of the things people complain about, and it's like, I don't know about that. Like, relax. It's, my grandfather moved into the St. Michael's Amagansett seniors living when it first opened, and it was great. He was able to downsize. He had people there. He had help if he needed it, if we needed someone to check in on him. That's great for the community, and I know a lot of other people out here have been put at ease knowing their mother or father is safe and happy at St. Michael's down there, and they could walk to Amagansett. So there is beneficial parts to it. I do want to move on to our next topic. Time goes fast when you're on the podcast. Historically, Long Island has had a tumultuous history with building of public space and public housing. We could talk about Robert Moses, what he did and didn't do. We could talk about the modern-day NIMBYism like we just did. But I don't want to talk about opinion-based things. Statistically, Long Island is the most restrictive single-family zoning in the country. Suffolk County is at 81% and Nassau County is at 74%. Those are really high numbers for single-family zoning. I would like for you, if you can, how could Long Island lower these percentages at least somewhat closer to the national average? For example, in 2018, Minneapolis became the first city to get rid of single-family zoning. Obviously, Long Island's not going to do that. We're not going to be that bold. Minneapolis is a very bold city. What could we do in Long Island to maybe lessen those numbers over the next few decades?
We can't lose sight of the fact that there is a high value to single-family home ownership, and that is a character of our communities that is highly valued by folks who have invested. So that I think has to be the starting point. We've spent over $1 billion on the preservation of open space. That's because we like to breathe out here and we like room. So density is something that we need to keep an eye on as we roll out the plans. But what it means is careful planning. What it means is an understanding that plans need to be developed that ensure that this isn't a haphazard approach, and that we have, for instance, transit-oriented development. We have development that folks from your generation appreciate, where they can walk to work, where they can walk to restaurants and music venues. Those are opportunities that need to be identified region by region, and you do need to ensure that you have the public buy-in in the communities that you've decided to do this kind of zoning in. The fund that we've been talking about at the beginning of this discussion requires that any town that adopt it and any town that could benefit from these revenues must have an affordable housing plan. And so that plan can include a number of components that are thoughtfully arrived at, including, for instance, granny homes. Like, what neighborhoods does it make sense to allow folks to have an attached accessory apartment? Yep. Or where in our downtowns can we put housing above retail? Yep. So there are ways of doing this without having to put in, huge multifamily developments, which is of a concern to many Long Islanders because, folks say we moved out of the city because we didn't want that kind of density. So there's a balance that has to be struck. Folks are concerned about their property values, those who are already invested in homes. But we have a hollow housing plan right now. It is literally empty in the middle, and so until we build that stock for middle income folks young people who can save and buy a home, buy an apartment, maybe buy a condo, then save until they can, realize the equity in that condo and then buy a small house a little bit further out. That you're seeing that happen in Patchogue, for instance. Patchogue
Yep.
has downtown developments where there are condos and co-ops where young people are able to buy as a starter home, and then they're able to move as their families grow to move into a larger home. So there are tons of appropriate locations around train stations, around employment centers, around vibrant downtowns where there's a nightlife. There are plenty of appropriate sites in our region for that kind of approach. But where that approach isn't necessary, we need to also recognize that there are other solutions, like accessory apartments, like apartments above retail, and like these relatively speaking small scale developments like the 26 unit Sandy Hollow or the 52 unit up on Pantago Road.
Yeah, and as a follow-up question, you mentioned property value, and property values, especially out here, have skyrocketed since the 80s. I mean, just absolutely skyrocketed. And you could make an argument from people from my age. You could hear this argument. Well, so what if their property value drops 2, 3, 4, 5%? It's skyrocketed so much that in the 80s, you could take a loan and take out a mortgage and buy a house in your 20s on Long Island. You can't really do that in most places now, certainly not where I live. But my boss, Michael Clark, could, for example, and he bought through the home ownership program that the town had and had subsidies from the government, et cetera, et cetera. It was easier back then. So you could hear this argument from people my age being like, so what? Your property value goes down 10% because of an affordable housing. It's gone up 300% since you originally bought it, or whatever the number may be. Is that argument valid, or is there a give and take with the property value?
Well, I don't think you can ever say that you could discount entirely that concern of any individual family. I mean, it is, as I said, extremely expensive to live on Long Island. So we want to encourage people to, put down stakes here and grow your family and have a home that you can pass on to your family. So, in fact, most of us in the middle class, have one big asset, and that's our home, and that's what we'll pass on to our kids. So to not recognize that that's an important impact, I think would be a mistake, and it would make it impossible, I believe, to have a successful program because of the pushback you would get, and legitimate pushback. So that doesn't mean to say, though, that this concern about the long-term health of our economy isn't very, very real. And
Right.
so I think it can be put a little bit differently, Matt, where we're not talking about an affordable project reducing home values
Yeah.
in where they're located. I think in truth, because it's become so difficult to live here and grow a family, that there is a value for the long-term health of the economy to take the steps you need to take. I think you need to watch if there are impacts on property value that lower them, then I think that is an issue and a challenge that we would have to overcome. But that's not what happened with the projects that we've done so far.
Yeah.
Just the opposite. What's happening is you see downtown Riverhead, there are big projects going up, and there are folks who are very alarmed about it. And at the same time, we see in Southold, that's the story of in the Newsday today.
Yep.
Southold property values are doubling
Yep.
in year over year, and they're the neighboring community to Riverhead. So we aren't seeing those impacts. Just the opposite. What we're seeing is responsibly done, affordable housing is increasing the value across the region, because what it means is we are going to have a sustainable economy in the long run. We're going to have workers in our restaurants. We're going to have hospital workers, school workers. We're going to have folks driving our buses. We're going to have the people that make a community, a rich and vibrant community, especially for those of us who live in resort area
Yeah.
where you have this enormous wealth. Well, somebody's got to support that enormous wealth, and that's us, right?
Yeah.
We're the ordinary people, and we need a place to live. So I think that the premise is an important one to consider, but I don't think, just like the NIMBY YIMBY,
Yeah.
it is far less of a argument with substance and teeth than it was 2 or 3 decades ago.
Oh yeah, I'm with you. I'm sure you know Michael Daly. Um, one thing that
I
drives me
have
nuts.
I have a YIMBY button that Michael gave me.
One thing that drives me nuts about some of these affordable housing projects is the outright lies that are spread about it. There are secret studies for a reason. You're not going to be inundated by 400 extra students in your school.
Right.
It's going to be like 25 maybe. People get thrown off by rumors and bad information, and that's really how a lot of these arguments and these projects get delayed, often because of misunderstanding. Quickly, I just want to ask one more topic because it was really hot in February. Accessory dwelling units. Fred Thiel is very passionate about this. I talked to him on his episode for half the episode about accessory dwelling units. While my personal opinion, it's not a long-term solution, but it can be a great Band-Aid for some in communities. You mentioned it in your previous answer. While there has been no new legislation, there almost was in February, but it didn't get passed. There's been a lot of movement towards ADUs, not only in New York State and Long Island, but throughout the whole country. What's your opinion on the accessory dwelling units, and how do you think Long Island and New York State, but more specifically Long Island, can utilize them in the future?
I think they are an important component of an overall plan with a number of different solutions to the issue. But there's just no question there are, as our population ages, there are a lot of good reasons to allow seniors, for instance, to have somebody renting a place in their home. First of all, then you have company, right? Then you
Yeah.
have somebody there with that senior. Oftentimes now, because it's challenging for young people to find housing, we're going back to an intergenerational living situation that decades and decades ago. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a nice thing if you're raising children and they can go next door in the same building and grandma is there.
Yep.
It's a very nice setup for all kinds of reasons. So the key is to have it locally driven. The key is to ensure it's been a hot topic up in Southhold, for
Oh
instance.
yeah.
The key is to ensure that you're thoughtful, that you are not avoiding the hard conversations. I think that's one of the most critical things that I've learned in my many years in public service is that the best solutions are when you hit the issues head on. And I find there are a lot of folks who, especially when they're new to politics, don't want to have those tough conversations because they're hard to do. I just finished 4 quarterly hearings on the Gabreski Airport
Yep.
noise issue because of what's happening in the East Hampton discussion. And because of COVID, there's lots and lots of discussion around Gabreski Airport.
Hmm.
But folks wanted to shy away from having that conversation because it's hard to hear. It's hard to have people yell at you. It's hard to hear these tough things. So with the ADUs, it's a very similar situation. I guess just to finish the thought on the Gabreski, we're about to release a report from those meetings that is going to be comprehensive and helpful, and it would not have come to fruition. We would not have something to hand the FAA to say these are challenges and solutions if we hadn't have taken on the tough conversations. Same thing with the ADUs. You can't shy away from the tough conversations. People have real concerns. You need to hear them. And then you need a local surgical solution. So it may be that some folks, I know in the town of Southampton, Hampton Bays is full of folks who really want to be able to have people in their homes. And then there are other communities who feel less so. So it's just like zoning, right? It is a zoning question. So there are some communities where 5 acre zoning is appropriate, and there
Hmm.
zip codes that have the highest property values in the United States. But there are many, many, many other places where the community would support it. I live in Pine Neck in Noyak, where there are tiny parcels, and we're happy. We talk to our neighbors over the fence, we were able, my husband and I, 20 years ago, were able to make an investment in a kind of dilapidated small home and then build it over time.
Hmm.
So I think there are communities where this ADUs are very, very welcome. And you don't want to overburden communities too, where this is where good government comes in
Yep.
important as well. You want to make sure that you're having the conversations with everybody, not just the people who
Yep.
are the noisiest, not just the people who don't have 2 jobs and can't come to a
Hmm.
government meeting. So we have to be proactive in getting feedback on where that zoning is appropriate, and we need to be data driven. We need to be smart, and but there's certainly room for all of it because it is a crisis and we need to hit it head on.
Yeah, and from what I've talked to Theo, I've talked to many different people about the ADUs, and it's out here if people are trying to get an idea of who you could be helping. It could be the police force, it could be the teachers, it could be workers that work for the government, so they don't have to travel, commute an hour and a half each way to get to their jobs, and they could do their jobs better.
Yep.
1997, East Hampton School District had 90% of the teachers live there. Now it's less than 20%. You can't tell me that doesn't have an effect on the education process. You
Yeah,
can't.
think also of the traffic too. We've been trying to figure out that traffic, but until people can own homes
Yep.
or have, housing costs that you can meet here in our community, we're never going to solve the traffic
Yeah, and
problem.
now we're seeing, unfortunately, issues related to that, where the schools can't hire athletic coaches. There's no umpires for little leaguers. There's no restaurant workers, and this is just the beginning of the issues. I try to tell people, how much you think your taxes are going to go up if we don't have a volunteer force anymore for fire and rescue, and we now need to pay people full time. Um, Any last thoughts you have on affordable housing before we wrap up here? Any last things you'd like to say? Because we are getting close to that time.
Well, I know that journalism is critically important. What you're doing is so important for, disseminating information, but I'd like to know when you're running for office.
I hear that a lot, actually. Believe it or not, Peter and those guys were messing with me a few weeks ago. We were doing some training, and yeah, it could be one day. My mother was on the Amagansett School Board for 12 years. I was class president, fraternity president. I do have some of those skills, yes.
We do need thoughtful people. We need young people, but we also need folks who do have this understanding of how difficult issues are. Are exciting to attack. It really is satisfying to have tough issues and then find out that you can find a solution and make it happen. So that's where we are with housing. We need smart, thoughtful people who have a bit of courage, who can stand up to those tough issues and work their way through it with respect for folks who may not agree with them, for folks who feel like they're adversely impacted. We just got to hit that head on and make sure that we're taking all stakeholders into consideration. But at this point, it's like the economy sort of across the board. We are developing a place where we have very wealthy and then folks who don't have much at all, and that gets thinner and thinner and thinner. That's hollowing out our economy. The cost of housing is contributing in a very real way to that hollowing out of our economy. And if we don't figure it out, we do not have a sustainable economy, either in our local neighborhoods or in the nation, as a whole. So we've got a lot of work to do. This new legislation and the things that are happening at the local level are critically important. We have a lot of folks who have bought in now, and we just need to continue doing that good work.
Well, thank you so much for coming on my show. I really appreciate it. This was a wonderful conversation. Hopefully we'll join paths again.
I hope so. Anytime, and good luck with all you're doing. It's really terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching, everyone at home, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you.